A young woman kneels in the dust, weeping. Her harvest, stew, rice, and meat, lies shattered across the earth. A beautiful evening where the entire village gathers in celebration. The aroma of delicious food and the warmth of loved ones bring joy to every. The feast was already in the dust before the sun climbed over the palm trees. 3 clay pots lay broken in the yard. One had held pepper soup. One had held rice. One had held the stew Chidera had been preparing for 7 days, waking before dawn to stir it, tasting it with the care of someone who had put her whole future inside a pot. By the time she reached the doorway, the red oil was soaking into the ground. The meat was in the dirt. The cooked rice was scattered with ashes and sand. Flies had already found it. And standing at the far edge of the yard, dressed in clean blue cloth, the chief's wife looked at the mess as if she had only just arrived. If you stay with me to the end of this story, you will understand why some people fear a poor woman's joy more than a rich man's anger. You will understand why one village kept a cooking stone untouched for 40 years. And you will understand how a meal thrown into the dirt fed more people than the feast that had been planned. Before we go further, picture the girl at the center of it. Her name was Chidera. She was 23 years old. She had no father, no mother, no brothers, and no sisters. The sickness that took her parents came during the heavy rains when she was 10. After that, she grew up the way some children do in villages that are kind but not soft. One woman let her sleep near the kitchen for a season. Another taught her how to wash cassava properly so it would not turn bitter. An old man showed her how to bargain without lowering her eyes. Nobody raised her alone. The village raised her in pieces. By 17, she had one skill that everybody knew about. She could cook. Not fancy cooking, not the kind done in wealthy compounds for people who sit on carved chairs and talk about other families. Chidera cooked the kind of food people remembered when they were tired. Soft yam with pepper that warmed your throat without burning it. Bean cakes, crisp outside and tender inside. Rice with smoked fish and scent leaf. Ground nut soup with just enough heat that it made old people nod while they ate. She sold from a wooden table in the market 3 days a week, and if you were late, you bought from somebody else, because her food finished first. But good cooking does not make a person rich. It makes them known. There is a difference. She lived in a narrow mud house with a patched roof and 2 neat cooking stones in the yard. Everything she owned had a place. The water pot stood in shade. The firewood stayed tied in bundles. Her spoons were wrapped in cloth. She had learned young that when life gives you little, order is one way to make the little look like enough. Then there was Obasi. Obasi was a carpenter. Not the loud kind, not the kind who laughs first and thinks later. He measured twice. He spoke once. When he built a door, it closed cleanly. When he promised a stool by market day, it was ready the evening before. He was 28, broad-shouldered, steady-handed, and respected in the quiet way that lasts longer than charm. For nearly 2 years, he bought food from Chidera's stall and said almost nothing except, "More pepper today," or "Keep the change." Then, one Harmattan evening, when the air was dry and cold, and the market was folding itself away, he waited until the last customer left. He stood by her table while she covered the remaining bean cakes with cloth. "I want to ask you something," he said. Chidera did not look up at first. "If it is for credit, I cannot." "It is not for credit." She looked at him then. "I have watched you for a long time," he said. "You are careful when nobody is watching. You are generous when nobody will praise you for it. I would like to come with elders to your yard." For a second, she did not understand him. Then she sat down right there on the market bench because her knees had become weak. That was how it began. Now, in their village, there was a custom older than memory. Before marriage blessings could be spoken, before bride and groom could stand before the elders at sunset, the bride's yard had to offer a ceremonial meal. Not a grand feast for the whole world, not wealth, not display, just a proper, respectful meal cooked in the bride's own compound and served before the evening shadows crossed the elder's feet. If the meal was not ready, the blessing waited, sometimes for months, sometimes until the next farming season. People said the custom was about respect. Old women said it was about something else. They said a household should begin with fire, salt, and sharing. A marriage that could not place food before witnesses had not yet opened its door to the world. Chidera took that custom seriously. She could not afford goats. She could not afford giant baskets of fish. She could not slaughter cows and call drummers from 3 roads away. But she told herself one thing again and again. The meal will be small, but it will be clean, warm, and worthy. So she planned. For 14 months, she saved, little by little. 1 cup of rice from each market week, dried pepper kept in tied leaves, palm oil bought in careful amounts, smoked fish wrapped and hung from the rafters, 1 hen, then another, a bag of onions purchased from a trader whose wife loved her cooking and gave her a kinder price. When others spent on wrappers and earrings, Chidera bought spices. When people asked why she was always counting, she smiled and said, "A good meal starts long before the pot." The village began to talk. Some said it kindly. "You will see, that girl will feed the elders well." Others said it with the pleasure that some people take in waiting for poor people to fail. "She is dreaming too high. What can an orphan serve that will not shame her?" And there was one woman who listened to all of this with a tightening jaw and a smile that never reached her eyes. Her name was Mama Nkem. Mama Nkem was the chief's wife. She lived in the biggest compound on the eastern side of the village, where the walls were painted fresh before every festival and visitors were received under a shaded veranda. She had servants. She had wrappers from the city. She had brass bowls that shone like little suns. When people married, when festivals came, when elders gathered, many meals in that village passed through her supervision. She was proud of that. She was not proud of many things quietly, but she was proud of being the woman people associated with grand occasions. And now, people had begun saying something she could not bear. They said, "Even if the feast is small, Chidera's hand has blessing in it." They said, "Some food fills the stomach, some food sits in the heart." They said, "Obasi is fortunate. That girl will make a home from almost nothing." That last sentence was the one Mama Nkem hated most. Because once, long before gold bracelets and a large house and people standing when she entered, she had been a girl with almost nothing herself. A girl people had laughed at. A girl who had once arrived at a ceremony in patched cloth and never forgotten the sound of richer women whispering. She had buried that girl under years of status and control. She had built herself into somebody nobody laughed at. And now, a poor orphan was being admired for precisely the kind of humble dignity Mama Nkem had spent a lifetime trying to erase from her own memory. Jealousy is a strange thing. It does not always say, "I want what you have." Sometimes it says, "How dare you survive what hurt me and still remain gentle?" The wedding week came. Obasi's people arrived from 2 neighboring villages. Children swept courtyards, men straightened benches, women carried water and gave advice nobody had asked for. Chidera's yard was small, but clean enough that old women nodded approvingly. The ceremonial meal would not be served until late afternoon, but the work began before sunrise. Rice washed, pepper ground, firewood stacked, soup simmering, meat seasoned. Chidera tied her wrapper tight, covered her hair, and moved from pot to pot with the focus of a person walking across a narrow bridge. At dawn, Mama Nkem came once, smiling. "My daughter," she said smoothly, standing near the doorway. "I came to greet you before the day becomes too busy." Chidera thanked her respectfully. Mama Nkem looked at the pots. "Ah, so this is the famous meal." "It is simple," Chidera said. "Simple can be respectable," said Mama Nkem, "if done properly." She smiled again, then left. Not long after, Chidera went to the back of the compound to bring more water from the storage drum. She was gone less than 3 minutes. When she came back, she heard the crack before she understood the sound. Then the shouting. Then the second crash. Then the third. She rounded the corner and saw it all at once. 2 boys running away through the side opening. 1 overturned bench, 1 broken serving tray, and the 3 main pots on the ground, their contents spilled into dust, ash, and chicken droppings. For 1 second, the world became very still. Then she dropped the water gourd and ran. She fell to her knees in the mess and tried, like a fool and like a person in grief, to save what could not be saved. She lifted rice with both hands. It slid through her fingers with sand. She tried to right a broken pot. Hot stew ran over her wrists. She looked around as if time might reverse itself from pity. People came quickly after that. First neighbors, then curious children, then women who gasped with their hands on their heads. And finally, Mama Nkem, walking in measured steps, saying the words people say when they want to sound shocked before they decide whether they are pleased. "What happened here?" Chidera could not answer. Obasi arrived at a run. He stopped short when he saw the ground, the red stew soaking into dirt, the smashed pots. Chidera kneeling in it with her hands stained orange and brown to the wrists. He bent beside her. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. "The meal," she whispered. "The meal is gone." He looked at the yard. He understood immediately what that meant. Not embarrassment, not inconvenience. The elder's meal had to be prepared and presented from this compound before evening. There were ingredients left for ordinary cooking, perhaps, but not enough for a ceremonial meal worthy of witnesses. Not enough time, not enough money, not enough anything. Some villagers became angry at once. "This is wickedness! Who would do this? Those boys, whose children were they?" Others were quieter and crueler. "Well, these things happen. A small girl trying to do a big family feast. Maybe it is a sign to wait. Perhaps the marriage should be postponed until she is better prepared." People often call cruelty wisdom when they want to speak it safely. Chidera heard all of it, every word. Not because anyone said it to her face, but because humiliation sharpens the ears. Mama Nkem stepped forward then, in all her polished dignity, and touched Chidera's shoulder with performative softness. "My daughter," she said, "do not cry too much. These things can be rebuilt another day." Another day. In that village, another day could mean another season, another cycle of gossip, another stretch of waiting, with everyone knowing why. Obasi stood up so fast the bench behind him tipped. "She will not be shamed today," he said. Nobody answered him, not because he was wrong, because they did not know how a right thing could become possible. Then, while everybody was still speaking over each other, one old voice came from near the gate. "So all of you have tongues," it said. "Do any of you have hands?" The crowd turned. It was Mama Udo. Mama Udo was 82 years old and walked with a carved stick polished smooth by years. She sold smoked fish in small quantities and had buried 2 husbands, 3 children, and nearly all her teeth. She did not waste words because she had outlived the need to impress anybody. She looked at the spilled food, then at Chidera, then at the crowd. "When my husband died," Mama Udo said, "who sat with me 3 nights and fed mourners when my daughters were too tired to stand?" Several women lowered their eyes. "Chidera," she said. "When my grandson broke his leg, who brought porridge every morning before market?" Nobody spoke. "Chidera," she said again. Then she turned, left without explanation, and everybody watched her go. She returned maybe 20 minutes later, slower but determined, carrying a covered calabash in one hand and a bundle tied in cloth under her arm. She set both down in front of Chidera. "In this calabash," she said, "is pepper stock I made before sunrise. In this cloth are 2 smoked fish I was saving for new yam. Today they are yours." Chidera stared at her. "Mama, I cannot take." "You can," Mama Udo said. "And you will." Then the old woman did one more thing. She lifted her stick and pointed it at the watching women one by one. "You," she said, "you brought your daughter to Chidera when she had fever." The woman nodded slowly. "You," she said to another, "she cooked for your naming ceremony when your sister failed to come." Another nod. "You," she said to a third, "she fed your son on credit for 3 weeks and never mentioned it." The woman covered her face. Mama Udo struck the ground once with her stick. "Then why is she in the dirt alone?" Silence held for a breath. Then one woman left at a run. Then 2 more. Then 6. Within minutes, the yard had become a place of motion. A young wife arrived carrying a bowl of washed rice. A widow brought onions. A girl with twins on her back brought dry pepper and salt wrapped in newspaper. Somebody came with tomatoes. Somebody came with scent leaf. Somebody came with firewood. One man rolled in an extra grinding stone. A boy brought clean water. 2 sisters came carrying a live chicken between them, arguing over whose it had been before they decided it no longer mattered. And still they kept coming. By midday, the chief's wife's title would be true in a way she had not intended. Women were indeed walking into Chidera's yard, not in 2s and 3s, but in a stream. The first problem was space. The yard was too small. The second problem was time. A ceremonial meal for elders was not just food. It needed order. Clean serving bowls, Fresh fire. Good timing. Enough to show respect. Not excess, but dignity. So the women moved the work to the open square near the old iroko tree. Mats were spread. Fires were built. Children were sent to wash leaves. Mortars began pounding. Pepper was ground in turns. One woman sorted rice while another cleaned fish. A third took charge of the chicken. A fourth began a second pot of soup. Chidera stood in the middle of it all, stunned, hands shaking, until Mama Udo caught her wrist. "Stand up inside yourself," the old woman said quietly. "This is still your feast. Command it." Something changed in Chidera's face when she heard that. She wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist. She tied her wrapper tighter. Then she began. "Not that pot," she said. "That one leaks. Wash the leaf plates again. The fish should go later, not now. Who has more dry pepper? Turn the fire down, the rice will split." People moved. What had been pity became labor. What had been gossip became rhythm. And because stories travel faster than instructions, the news ran beyond the village. A palm wine seller carried it one way. A bicycle trader carried it another. A girl sent to fetch salt told the whole story before she returned. By 1 o'clock, women from the neighboring road began arriving too. Some had never met Chidera. They had only heard that a bride's ceremonial meal had been destroyed, and the women of the village were rebuilding it from generosity. They did not come empty-handed. They brought groundnut paste, plantains, more rice, 3 baskets of tomatoes, a sack of cassava flour, dried crayfish, bitter leaf, palm oil. One woman brought only onions and said apologetically, "It is all I have." Mama Udo took the onions and answered, "Then today, it is enough." At about that time, Mama Nkem made her second move. She sent one of her servants quietly to the road leading from the western village with a message. The ceremony had been delayed. No need to come. The girl had failed. The matter would be settled later. She also bought nearly all the salt left in the market and instructed her cook not to sell any. Jealous people are rarely lazy. They work very hard at small evil. It almost helped her. By 2 o'clock, the square had enough food for a feast, but not enough seasoning to balance the great volume of soup now required. The women tasted, looked at one another, needed more salt, needed more dry pepper, needed one thing to lift the flavor from ordinary to memorable. Then a tall woman from the western road entered the square, carrying a woven bag. "I was told not to come," she said. "That is how I knew I must." The whole square laughed for the first time that day. She opened the bag. Inside were seasoning seeds, salt, and dried prawns from her sister's stall across the river. "Whoever lied on the road," she said, "lied too late." That broke whatever fear remained. From then on, the work took on the feeling of something larger than rescue. It became witness. Men erected shade cloth where they could. Drummers arriving early for the evening blessing sat aside and began tapping practice rhythms on upturned buckets. Old women who could no longer pound pepper sat sorting leaves with fingers still exact. Girls too young to cook well carried plates from washing area to serving mats like attendants in a palace. Even those who had spoken badly in the morning found some work to do by afternoon, because shame is easier to carry when your hands are busy. And all the while, Mama Nkem watched from the veranda of her compound. Nobody invited her. Nobody accused her either. That is sometimes worse. By 4 o'clock, the square smelled like triumph. Pepper soup rich and bright, rice steaming, stew deep red with oil shining at the top. Fried plantain added not because custom required it, but because one woman insisted no elder should bless a marriage on an empty, sweet note. Chicken browned at the edges, fish soup simmering in reserve, leaf plates stacked, water cooled in clay pots under wet cloth. Chidera moved among the fires like someone inside a dream she had not dared ask for. Every few steps, somebody pressed something into her hand. Drink water. Taste this. Sit for 1 minute. Breathe. She obeyed almost none of them. Her eyes kept shifting westward, measuring the sun. Time in villages has many forms. There is market time, rain time, harvest time, morning time. But on that day there was only shadow time. Everyone watched the length of light. At last, as late afternoon softened, the elders were called. Benches were cleaned, bowls arranged. The ceremonial plates were prepared with a care beyond wealth. Rice placed neatly, soup balanced, fish set well, garnish of scent leaf, water beside each elder. No extravagance, no disorder. Just respect so visible it became beauty. When Chidera carried the first tray forward, the square fell quiet. Her wrapper had been changed. One woman had lent her coral beads. Another had tied a cleaner headscarf around her hair. Her hands were still marked with faint stains from the ruined morning meal, but perhaps that made the moment stronger. She did not look like a princess. She looked like a woman who had passed through trouble and reached the other side, still standing. The chief cleared his throat. The eldest elder looked at the tray, then at the assembled people, then at Chidera. "Who cooked this meal?" he asked. Before she could answer, voices rose from every side. "She led it. We all helped. It is hers. It is ours." The old man smiled in spite of himself. "Then today," he said, "this village has reminded us what a household truly is." The trays were set down. The elders ate. Nobody breathed normally until the first elder took a second bite. Then another. Then another. One of them, an old man known for criticism so sharp it had spoiled many joyful days, wiped his fingers carefully and said, "If this is food made after disaster, I pity those who only taste peace." Laughter broke across the square like rain. And there, with the sun still above the line of trees, the blessing proceeded. Obasi came forward. Chidera stood beside him. Words were spoken, families acknowledged, witnesses named. The marriage blessing was given before dusk crossed the elders' feet. The drummers began properly then. Children shouted, women ululated, and food that had almost become humiliation became celebration. Not only for the elders, for everyone. Because the rebuilt feast had grown far beyond its original plan. It fed the bridegroom's people, the market visitors, the women from other roads, the boys who had hauled wood, the children who had washed plates, even the old men who had pretended all day they were only observing tradition. Late in the evening, when the drums were thick in the air and the lamps were being lit, people noticed something else. Mama Nkem stood alone. She had not been driven away. She had not been insulted, but no one sought her out. No one brought her into the dancing circle. No one asked her opinion. She stood under her own fine wrapper and watched a poor orphan become the center of a joy she had tried to break. That would have been enough punishment for some people. For others, truth waits until silence. 3 days later, Mama and Kem came to Chidera's house just after sunrise. The village was quiet. Obasi had gone to the carpenter's shed. Chidera was alone, washing a pot blackened from the communal cooking fires. When she opened the door and saw the chief's wife there, she straightened slowly. Mama and Kem did not sit. For a long moment, she simply stood in the yard, looking at the same cooking stones that had become famous. Then she said, "It was me." Chidera did not answer. "I sent the boys," Mama and Kem said. "I told them to overturn the pots. I told them to run before they were seen. I did not think the whole village would rise." Still, Chidera said nothing. "I also sent word to the western road to stop others from coming." Now Chidera looked at her properly. "Why?" Mama and Kem laughed once, but there was no joy in it. "Because when people spoke of your meal, they spoke as if dignity could come from little, as if care could shine without wealth, as if a woman with almost nothing could still be admired." Her voice thinned. "And because once, long ago, I was that woman, and nobody was kind to me." She reached into the fold of her wrapper and took out a small wooden spoon darkened with age. "I cooked my first marriage meal with this," she said. "My mother borrowed the pot. My cloth was patched. Women laughed. I swore nobody would ever look down on me again. I became strong. Then I became respected. Then I became feared. And somewhere in all of that, I started believing the poor should bow to survive." She held out the spoon. "When I saw them praising you, I felt that old laughter in my ears. So I crushed what I could not control." That was her reason. It was not a noble reason. Pain does not become wisdom just because it is old. Chidera washed her hands slowly before speaking. "If you had come that morning with a bag of salt instead of malice," she said, "people would have honored your story. If you had stood with us at the fire, women would have made space for you. If you had remembered yourself without hating me for it, you would not be standing alone now." Mama and Kem closed her fingers around the wooden spoon so tightly her knuckles changed color. Tears came then, sudden and unwilling. Not theatrical tears, not the kind meant for public forgiveness. The private tears of someone who has finally seen the shape of the thing she became. Chidera looked at the spoon, then at the older woman. "Keep it," Mama and Kem whispered. Chidera shook her head. "No, keep it where you can see it. Some objects are not for hiding." That month, the village elders met and made a small decision that became a lasting custom. Near the Iroko tree in the square, they placed 3 cooking stones in a permanent circle. Nobody would use them for ordinary days. They would be used only if a family faced sudden loss before a wedding, naming ceremony, funeral meal, or harvest gathering. Anyone in need could light that fire, and no house was permitted to say, "This is not my concern." People called it the hearth of many hands. Years passed. Girls married and heard the story. Boys grew into men and heard it too. The tale changed in small ways, as all village stories do. Some said 200 women came. Some said 300. Some said the soup tasted better than any feast before or after. Old men added details they had not witnessed. Children made the wicked boys taller and more foolish with each telling. But some facts remained. The meal was thrown into the dust. The bride did not stand alone for long. The village answered shame with labor, and the blessing reached her before sunset. As for Mama Nkem, she was never quite the same after that. She did not lose her house. She did not lose her title. But she lost the invisible wall that had protected her pride. In later years, when ceremonies approached, people sometimes saw her arriving early with ingredients and saying very little. She never became warm, exactly, but she learned to be useful. In some lives, that is the first honest form of repentance. Chidera and Obasi remained married a long time. Whenever a young bride panicked before a ceremony, people sent her to Chidera. Whenever a family said, "We do not have enough," older women answered, "Enough for one house is small. Enough for a village is different." And when girls asked Chidera what saved her wedding day, she did not say luck. She did not say beauty. She did not say destiny. She said, "The hands you help in quiet seasons may be the hands that lift you in public sorrow." That is the heart of it. Not every enemy can be stopped before damage is done. Not every cruel person is exposed immediately. Sometimes the pot is already broken before the first witness arrives. Sometimes what you prepared with love lies in the dust where everyone can see it. Sometimes your humiliation is public, hot, and impossible to hide. But destruction is not the end of every story. A wicked hand may overturn a feast. It cannot easily defeat 100 willing hands that rise together. That is why jealousy is always weaker than community, even when it strikes first. If this story stayed with you, remember this line: what is spilled by envy can still be gathered by love.